Hello, this is Aram Hamparian with the Armenian National Committee of America here in Washington, D.C. If you follow the news today, you're familiar with the very troubling fact that Azerbaijan has yet again violated yet another ceasefire. At this time in the Hadrut region of Artsakh, which is in the southern part of Artsakh, occupying several villages, injuring a number of Artsakh defense forces, and we hear as well capturing at least one civilian who reportedly is being abused, as have so many of those civilians and soldiers who have been taken captive by Azerbaijan. I'm talking to you today because I need you to take action. I need you to go to the link that is the title of this video, anca.org/alert. With that alert, you can condemn, you can end, and you can send. Let me explain. First, encourage Biden, encourage Trump, encourage Congress to condemn Azerbaijan's ceasefire violation, to end all U.S. military assistance to Azerbaijan, and to send U.S. humanitarian assistance to help safely and sustainably resettle Armenians back in their ancestral indigenous homes in Artsakh. So with this one alert, anca.org/alert, you can condemn, you can end U.S. military aid to Baku and send U.S. humanitarian assistance to Artsakh and Armenia. Those are the three calls being made in this letter. There's a range of other issues as well, but these are the top tier requests: the condemning of the action, the ending of the military aid to Baku, and the sending of U.S. humanitarian assistance to Artsakh and Armenia to resettle safely and sustainably the Armenians of Artsakh, this indigenous ancestral home of a Christian population that goes back hundreds, thousands of years. That's the request today. So my request today is go to anca.org/alert. Take that action now. Take it this evening. It's Saturday evening. Take that action before you go to bed tonight and share it with your friends, and insist that your friends, your neighbors, your colleagues, your coworkers, classmates, and others take this action today. I've said this before, and I will say it again, and it speaks also to pan-Armenian concerns. The world will take issues such as this ceasefire violation, no more seriously than we will. If we have to be the ones raising the arms, we have to be the ones demanding action. We have to be the ones holding these elected officials accountable. Left to themselves, I'm sorry to say, they'll be distracted by a million other issues. If you make this a priority for yourself, you'll make it a priority for them as well. So it's very important that you take action today at anca.org/alert. anca.org/alert. That is my heartfelt appeal to each of you who are online now and who watch this later, who share it with friends and relatives. Please, we need to take action in an urgent manner regarding this ceasefire violation that took place just hours ago. You may be aware that Aliyev ordered this attack basically at the same time that he was meeting with the OSCE Minsk Group co-chairs. These are representatives of the U.S., France, and Russia who had traveled to Baku to speak with him. He was treated them in the rudest, most discourteous fashion. When they were sitting before him, he invited in television cameras, and he reminded them, he pointed out to them, I didn't invite you here. You're here on your own accord. If you have something to say it to the camera. Otherwise, you can leave. And then he proceeded to give them a 35-minute lecture on Azerbaijan's crushing defeat of Armenians, and how he drives the agenda. He sets the program for the international community as they relate to the Artsakh issue, which he considers solved through military force. He mocked and ridiculed the OSCE Minsk Group, and in the process, the U.S., the French, and to some extent the Russian co-chair of that process. And the tragedy of it is that the three representatives of these three major powers just sat there and listened as he berated them, as he boasted about his accomplishments and how he flagrantly disregarded their input and the mandate that they were given to work on the issue. And they just sort of meekly, very sheepishly, offered some comments about how they would take his message back to their capitals. But we are certainly in a situation where Aliyev feels emboldened, not simply to attack and slaughter and even torture Armenians, but also to disrespect the US, France, and to some extent Russia. I was obviously troubled deeply as an Armenian to see this treatment of our issue by the leader of a country who's declared war on the Armenians of the world. But also as an American, I would just, the America that I know doesn't take lectures and doesn't take being berated sitting down. Petty dictators, petro monarchs, humiliating U.S. diplomats is not something that the United States should abide. It is not something that we should tolerate. In fact, the proper answer to that is to stand up and to walk out when talked to in that manner. But nonetheless, it seems like I don't know if it's a dysfunction on the U.S. side, if it's a calculated deference to Aliyev's ambitions, maybe it's a fear of Erdogan. Whatever the hell it is, the net effect today was a foreign dictator, corrupt, undemocratic foreign dictator, guy who got his job from his dad, made his wife his vice president, a joke of a Democrat, there's no democracy there at all, lecturing the United States, France, and Russia, and just requiring that these three diplomats sit across the table from him and take his verbal beating, and then they sheepishly, offered a couple of words in response, and it was really a disgrace. And it speaks to, unfortunately, at least on our side as Americans, the total system-wide failure of American diplomacy as it relates to the U.S. response to Azerbaijan's attack on Artsakh. This Azerbaijani attack backed by Turkey and ISIS mercenaries against a very small, far weaker Armenian adversary, unprovoked. They came in, the U.S. played the game of, well, we're not taking sides, when they knew very well who initiated aggression, what their interests were, how they were prosecuting the war, what types of war crimes they were committing. All this is readily available to the U.S. government, and yet they held to this false idea of neutrality, and we're not going to get involved. I think the U.S. Embassy in Yerevan symbolized perhaps the depths of the U.S. failure, in that there was not a word uttered of support or sympathy for the Armenian side, no effort to check the Azeri assault. We have all in our memory the legacy of Henry Morgenthau, the U.S. ambassador to the Ottoman Empire, who did so much while in office and outside of office, publicly and privately, to argue against evil, to argue against injustice, to argue against the perpetrators of violence, and to defend the victims of violence. He did that in a way that I think makes us all super proud. I think we can, generations after his example, we all look to him and say that's what an American diplomat should be. And our diplomats not only didn't meet his standard, they didn't even aspire to his standard. They played a cautious, bureaucratic game. Keep your head down, keep your mouth shut. Don't risk anything that might jeopardize your next performance review or your next promotion. It was just a profile in utter cowardice. Utter cowardice. The excuses that were shared by National Security Advisor O'Brien and by folks at the State Department were disingenuous. They talked about maintaining neutrality so that they might in some way, broker a peace or play some constructive role. None of that happened, and they knew none of it would happen. They didn't take sides so they wouldn't have to take sides. They maybe had some interest, maybe some short-term expediencies that they sought to accomplish, but in the end, the net effect is they said nothing, they did nothing, they did not raise their voices, did not stand up in the least on the side of peace, on the side of justice, against violence and oppression. It is a system-wide failure of U.S. diplomacy. We're hopeful that as a new administration gets sworn in, that they will reset U.S.-Armenian relations and at the very least start with a new ambassador in Yerevan. The current ambassador was tested and failed the test. We gave her an F rating on 15 different metrics, 15 areas in which we evaluated her performance. We took some criticism in our community because even though we gave her an F, there were many people who said that we should have been tougher. It was simply the lowest grade that we could give. But really a terrible failure, not just of the ambassador, but of the entire team, going here into Washington, going all the way up the chain of command, from the assistant secretary to the secretary and the national security advisor, and ultimately the president. It was a system-wide failure, and there needs to be accountability. You know, we're Americans, and it's a hallmark of our democracy that we hold our elected officials, our public servants accountable. Diplomats, I think, feel some sense of entitlement or insulation, or that somehow they're immune from, you know, our American democracy, but they're not. They're answerable to the American people. It's through all these different layers and you know, different processes, but ultimately they answer to the American people. And we're going to make sure that the American people understand how well they performed and are able to communicate through Congress and other means to the Department of State that we need an absolute reset of U.S.-Armenia relations. So I'm going to touch on a couple other points, but I did want to stress once again, if you've joined after the outset of this video, please go to anca.org/alert, anca.org/alert. That will allow you to take 3 actions: to condemn, to end, to send. I'll explain. To condemn Azerbaijan's ceasefire violation, to end U.S. military assistance to Baku, and to send U.S. humanitarian aid to Artsakh and to help resettle safely and sustainably the indigenous Armenian population back to their homes in Artsakh. So to condemn, to end, to send. You can do all of that to Trump, to Biden, and to your members of Congress by visiting anca.org/alert. We're obviously active on a range of other issues. If you've followed our videos over the last few days, you're familiar with this. You can tune out. Otherwise, if you want to hear about some of our other projects and other initiatives, priorities, stay tuned. Very high on our list, of course, is, as I mentioned, humanitarian assistance, urgent, emergency, crisis assistance to help Armenia with housing, with medicine, with COVID, with emergency response to this terrible aggression by Azerbaijan and its Turkish and ISIS allies. That's at the very top of the list. And that number we have set at $250 million. That's in the ballpark of 2 times the most assistance Armenia got during the independence era. And certainly today is an absolute and utter crisis and requires at least a doubling of the highest number. So the number 250 million is a start. That is a start. The administration has talked about between, I think, 5 and 10 million for all the victims of the conflict. That's obviously just a minor down payment, and it is in a sense tone deaf, and it reflects, in fact, the indifference that was exhibited during the conflict, during the attack, is now being reflected in the humanitarian response, which is as anemic in terms of dollars as the response to the aggression was in any material sense. So that's number one. That assistance should be followed longer term by appropriated assistance to work on reconstruction and development. That's a longer term project, and that's something that Congress will need to be involved in. There's a third aid channel. There's the emergency crisis, there's the appropriated aid, and then there's a third channel, which is called the Millennium Challenge Account, which is a merit-based assistance program chartered by Congress that allows countries to compete for assistance programs that alleviate poverty. And it's merit-based because they have to meet certain criteria in terms of democracy and corruption, which Armenia does. And they also have to be a low-income country. Now, as it turns out, Armenia graduated last year to a middle-income country. The sad news of this aggression is that the heavy burdens of this war and this attack will certainly drive Armenia down into a low-income country again, which will make it eligible for the Millennium Challenge Corporation. And we're eager to see the U.S. and Armenia start talks right away on a science, technology, engineering compact in the neighborhood of $200 million. And I think that Armenia certainly merits this based on its performance on democracy and corruption. But more urgently, Armenia needs this as a way to help rebuild from this terrible, terrible aggression. If the U.S. could not do anything, could not lift a finger to stop Azerbaijan, well, at the very least, it can help Armenia rebuild from the aggression that resulted from that indifference. The United States also on the aid front should play a role in encouraging our representatives, our American representatives, to the international finance institutions to push for low interest loans, zero interest credits, and also outright grants to Armenia. Armenia needs that, and the U.S. can play a role in the international financial community to help get that done. I touched earlier on prisoners. It seems that even today, more prisoners were taken. Azerbaijan has not returned prisoners. Even here we are, more than a month after the end of fighting. We need the U.S. to play a leadership role on that. We've heard some rhetoric about pressure that's being applied. It's simply hard to believe that rhetoric when so much that has been said by our U.S. government on this subject has just been, unsustainable upon any inspection, upon any examination. You look at like, well, we're encouraging both sides to cease their violence, and they do absolutely nothing to cease the violence. And today we saw Aliyev just dress down a U.S., a Russian, and a French diplomat, and the U.S. response was a timid one at best. And if that's what's going on, if that's the level of the U.S. response to Azeri pressure, it's hard to believe that they're doing much on the prisoners, but they should. And that doesn't mean that we should ever relent. It just means we have to work twice as hard to get the outcome that we want. So please go to anca.org/prisoners, and we have an action alert to press Azerbaijan to release those who are held captive. If one half of what we have seen and read is true, they are experiencing the worst abuse, torture, and torment you can conceive. And the failure of the United States to call that out, the failure of human rights organizations to drop their both sides, false narrative is truly inexcusable. More broadly, on status and security issues, of course, we continue to press for the recognition of Artsakh. There are very powerful historical grounds for U.S. recognition. Artsakh has been part of Armenia as long as there has been an Armenia. There's also a very powerful legal basis for Artsakh's independence. The fact that Artsakh was never part of a independent Azerbaijan, that it seceded under all the legal authorities of the time. There's a strong legal basis, strong historical basis, but ultimately it's about survival. Artsakh today, any part of Artsakh that is within the military grasp of Azerbaijan will come under attack and will be destroyed. Those who make the legal argument against Artsakh's independence or the historical argument against Artsakh's independence are very callously signing a death warrant for Artsakh. Because if Artsakh is under Azerbaijani control, the people there will be killed. They will be ethnically cleansed. There is no doubt about it. Aliyev proves it every day. He boasts about it every day. Recognition is not like a historical thing. It's not a legal thing. Ultimately, today it is most urgently a matter of survival. We've called, obviously, for the U.S. to re-engage in the Minsk group. We would hope that they would re-engage in a way that is more meaningful than we saw on video today. That the U.S. should act like a great power and not allow itself to be publicly berated by a petty petromonarch. If that's where we have sunk as a nation, then I guess the problems go far beyond Artsakh. I felt embarrassed watching that video as an American. In terms of assistance and sanctions, obviously we want to see sanctions imposed on Turkey and Azerbaijan. The Congress has the laws in place. The question is, will the president apply those sanctions? To date, the President Trump has not. He might do that. Will he do that before he leaves office? Seems unlikely. Would Biden do it? Would he try to do a reset to Turkey relations, or is he going to come down hard on Turkey? These are things we have to see. Certainly, we would like to see Section 907 fully enforced. Right now, every president since Bush, Obama, Trump, they've all waived that law. That law should be fully enforced. It should not be waived. It should be fully enforced. As I said, the assistance to Azerbaijan has to end, and we need to see sanctions on the Erdogan and Aliyev regimes, not just the countries, but the leaders themselves, in the form of denying them visas, the freezing of their assets, disallowing them to conduct business with U.S. persons, things of that sort. It's very often personal sanctions on top leaders that ultimately have the greatest result, because they value their access to the U.S., they value their access to the U.S. financial institutions and commercial markets. So these are all on the agenda and need to be pushed very aggressively. And there are ways you can do that. In fact, by going to anca.org/alert, on that in the listing of things that you'll be calling for are these types of sanctions, are the 907 issue, the assistance issue, things of that sort. During the war itself, we made a point of challenging each of the U.S. companies, I think there was 8 or 9, whose parts were found in the Turkish Bayraktar drones that Azerbaijan used to kill Armenian civilians, Armenian soldiers, to commit war crimes against the people of Artsakh, and even to attack Armenia. These companies were, as you may know, Garmin, Xilinx, Trimble, Behringer, Viasat, Comant, Milestech, Smart Micro, Westcam, and Hangst. Most are US-based. Some are US-based subsidiaries of foreign firms, but each of their parts were discovered in the Bayraktar drones, which raises serious legal issues regarding arms export control laws and just moral issues about why are American parts being used to kill Armenians. So 5 of them got back in touch with the ANC and agreed to either stop the sale or to suspend the sales or to investigate how their products ended up in these Bayraktar drones. And that's good in and of itself. It's not good that some didn't respond, but it's a step forward that some of them did and did express some willingness. Hard to enforce, hard to verify, but it's better that they acknowledged it and committed to stop the process of providing these weapons, these parts to these weapons that Turkey was using and Azerbaijan were using to kill Armenians. But that's not where it ends. The US Congress has to investigate each of these parts and each of these companies, and the US government itself, the Department of Justice, the Department of State, the Pentagon, need to investigate how exactly this happened. And they need to pursue this as they would any criminal case, right? It is not within US law for, let's say, a NATO country to provide US weapons, right? NATO country weapons or parts or technology or dual-use components to a third party, right? Very likely laws were broken there. That needs to be examined. Ultimately, the courts can decide, if a violation occurred, if a violation didn't occur, what the punishment for that violation should be. But the law should apply, and there should be no free pass, and there should not be. We should not let anybody sweep this under the rug. We will not let anyone sweep this under the rug. Each of these companies needs to answer for why their parts ended up in weapons that killed Armenians. Now, they may demonstrate that they're not liable. They may prove in a court of law that it was done outside of their control or without their direction. And if that's the case, so be it. But there needs to be a process that examines each of these instances, and we're pushing for that. And we'll also share with you in the coming days ways that you can also push your members of Congress, push the administration to scrutinize how these weapons, how these American parts ended up killing Armenians. That's entirely unacceptable. Entirely unacceptable. There are some things in the region that are beyond the control of American citizens of Armenian heritage. But this is not one of those issues. This is an American issue. This is an issue that deals with U.S. weaponry, U.S. parts, U.S. technology, right, and U.S. law. And as Americans, we are full stakeholders in that process and have every right to demand that the law is enforced. Just like other laws are enforced, this law needs to be enforced. And we're going to turn to you in the next days and weeks to help us secure justice for the people who were killed by weapons that included U.S. parts and technology. Turning to a couple of final issues, the churches and monuments. The U.S. unfortunately has a terrible record in terms of protecting the Armenian cultural heritage in Western Armenia. Zero has been done. And now the Armenian cultural heritage, the considerable, significant set of churches and monasteries and cemeteries that are now in territory occupied by the Azerbaijani military. We need to get U.S. support to document, to monitor, to prevent the desecration of these sites. Again, the U.S. record here is remarkably weak. The excuse trotted out for not condemning the desecration of the Julfa cemetery in 2005, which was destroyed on videotape. It was done, out in the open and documented on video. The U.S. government took months and months to even acknowledge that such a thing may have happened, and ultimately said something like, well, if we were to condemn this, that might set back the peace process. The fact of the matter is, U.S. silence on endless violations like that, serious violations that killed humans and others that destroyed property and cultural monuments, it was exactly that silence that set back the peace process, that created the conditions, the environment of impunity that emboldened Azerbaijan and Turkey to launch the war on September 27th. We ended up here today in large part because the U.S. and others around the world, just turned a blind eye, sent a signal, an unmistakable signal to Ilham Aliyev that really, whatever the hell you do, we're not really going to lift a finger. We're not going to lift a finger. The Robert O'Brien, the National Security Advisor, traveled to California, met with Armenians, said he had Armenian friends, which is always a suspect intro to any type of assertion, but said publicly, we're not going to take sides. We're not, he acknowledged the Armenians are suffering terribly, acknowledged Azerbaijan as the aggressor, but said we're not going to take sides because that would mean that we're abandoning our neutrality. Ilham Aliyev is many things, but he's not stupid. And he read in those comments, I can do whatever the hell I want because the Americans have just promised me on video, on live TV, essentially, that they're not going to say a word because that would compromise their blessed neutrality, the neutrality which ultimately resulted in nothing. The neutrality that resulted earlier today in Aliyev berating an American diplomat and the American diplomat just taking it. It's not strength. It's not wisdom. The promise of quiet diplomacy, the promise of maintaining neutrality to work behind the scenes, that is a fiction. And in a word, it's a lie. It is a lie. And I think moving forward, we have to be quicker. I certainly need to be quicker to point out when we are being lied to. That happened way too often along on the path to the September 27th war, and it contributed to it in ways that should not have been. We should not have permitted. We should not have permitted. In terms of legislation, we're pushing still for SRES 754 and SRES 755 measures, bipartisan measures introduced by Senator Menendez of New Jersey that require reporting on U.S. security assistance to Turkey and Azerbaijan with an eye toward ultimately restricting U.S. security assistance to Turkey and Azerbaijan. We're pushing for those measures. There's not much time left this session, but we'd like to see those go through. There's HRES 1203 dealing with recognition of Artsakh, and HRES 1165, which deals with condemning Turkey and Azerbaijan. Again, we're very late in the session. We're continuing to push them in these final days, but ultimately it looks like something that may be carried over until the next session of Congress. And the next session as well, obviously we'll push for the robust humanitarian assistance that we absolutely need. We will continue to press the lobby firms that work for Turkey and Azerbaijan. You may be familiar that BGR Group has maintained its Azerbaijan contract. Livingston, Mercury, DLA Piper, and others have dropped Turkey and Azerbaijan. BGR, a couple of others are holding out. We need to keep the pressure up on them to drop these very violent, very vile, very violent clients. That it is a disgrace to them and their other clients that they continue to represent Ilham Aliyev and Recep Erdogan, two of the most brutal dictators on the planet. I'll wrap up again just with a commentary on U.S.-Armenia relations. I said, the Ambassador Tracy on 15 different metrics got failing grades. I think on some she got D's, on almost all of them she got F's. Really a profile in just failed diplomacy and a mission that fell short every step of the way. The few times that the embassy did weigh in, it weighed in on the wrong side. So, for example, the ambassador made a point of speaking against the U.S. demining program in Artsakh, a program that did nothing but save the lives mostly of farmers and children, that cost the U.S. taxpayer about $1.5 million a year, an incredibly modest contribution to peace in the region. And yet our embassy decided to make that an issue to fight. That became the battleground for U.S. Embassy Yerevan, was to kill a demining program so that a couple more landmines can be left in the ground, where a couple more kids can get blown up, or a couple of farmers can lose their legs. That's where our ambassador, that's where our embassy chose to fight the battle. The same can be said of reprogramming assistance. We started talking to our embassy in I believe March of this year, February, March of this year, about the urgency of reprogramming U.S. assistance, at least $25 million of the assistance that goes to all these various programs, but none of them nearly as urgent or nearly as vital or nearly as life-saving as fighting the COVID pandemic in Armenia, which got hit very hard by this virus. So, a few $1 million here and there were reprogrammed, but couldn't get the $25 million because, the programs had to go to some, I think, 11 went to some kind of democracy program. And again, democracy, is it really democracy? Is it just, meddling in Armenia's, democracy, or is it actual democracy promotion? And in the end, was that as urgent as fighting the COVID virus? So the battles that the ambassador and the embassy chose, fighting reprogramming and killing the assistance to demine Artsakh, those are two cases where they really got involved, at least certainly on issues that we were pushing. And then on the other issues, such as how many Armenians are being slaughtered, what is the existential threat to the country that you represent the United States in, what is your commentary on the hundreds and hundreds and thousands of deaths that Armenian families are experiencing during the course of this conflict? Not a word, not a word. So really an epic failure at the level of the U.S. mission, but take it up the chain of command here into Washington, the caucus's desk, the Deputy Assistant Secretary, the Assistant Secretary, the Secretary of State, and the National Security Advisor, leading all the way up, of course, to the President. Just a system-wide, utter failure of U.S. diplomacy. Again, the criticism we've received from our community is for being too soft on this issue. Short of folks who feed off U.S. government grants, I don't think there's really anybody who has anything good to say about the U.S. response to Azerbaijan's aggression. It was the worst sort of false neutrality. It was characterized by lies and deception, and really an insulting condescension to a community that understands its history, that understands the interests and the future and the stakes that are before the Armenian nation. So we really, truly need a reset and an acknowledgement from the stakeholders in this process who really, really let America down, let Americans of Armenian heritage down, and ultimately let Armenia down as well. Thanks very much.